So it is windy as fuck. I just got done skating a little over 5 miles, 5.19. And normally I like going to like a solid mile space. Like, okay, 6 would be the next one, right? Since I was already over 5. But that kicked my ass. There was this path that was basically a wind tunnel, and it was all coming at me, and I had a really hard time getting through there. And there were a couple girls on the softball field, and I'm pretty sure they were laughing at me. But it was a struggle. So I decided when I got back to the car, fuck it, I was done. And yeah, here I am. It was hella windy. I think my weather app said the wind gusts up to like 35 miles an hour or something. Like skating right into that, that's not helpful. But I've been thinking that I kind of like doing videos after I skate because I feel like I get a little bit of clarity, at least get some more of that chaos out of my system. And yeah, it was actually yesterday's video. I was kind of in a crunch trying to contend with my dying phone battery. Today I am at 54%, so I don't have to worry about that today. But yeah, yesterday it was like it dimmed and like went, I think 5% it dims, and it did that. It was like, oh, gotta end. So I did, and then it was like 3% by the time I shut it off and headed out. So I made it, but it was close. I discovered a new to me band that I'm really enjoying. It's called Bloodywood. It is Indian folk metal. And I was listening to my normal skate music when I started. I was like, no, I'm thinking something dancier. So I was gonna go to one of like my dance playlist or whatever. But when I was like, wait a second, I found these guys the other day and I liked their sound, but I only heard the one song. Is Dana Dan. Excuse me if I like white girled that up, but I mean, I am, so yeah, but I really like that song. But then I just went to I followed them on Spotify, and then I just went to their music and listened to that the whole time. That was worth it. I think it was exactly what I was looking for, to be honest, so yay for that. The downside of doing a video after I skate is, especially if I'm skating into the wind, now I'm kind of wiped. I kind of really would like to go home and take a nap or something, but it's not on the agenda. Next on the agenda, if I remember it, there is this lilac bush at the corner of my house where my bed, the corner of the house where my bedroom is. It's right by the pond, and there is this morning glory vine that is like all the way through it, and it's really overgrown, the bush itself, but then especially with this morning glory going through it, and since nothing's bloomed currently, it'd be a nice time to just like hack a bunch of it off before it does bloom, and then it's all pretty and don't want to touch it. Yeah. There's also a cactus down there that could probably go, but don't like that cactus. Probably, if we were going to put a cactus there, should have gone with the other window, on account of there is a lamp on that side of the house, so it's really doubtful that anybody would try to come into that way anyway, plus they'd have to navigate through the freaking waterfall. But it seemed like a safe place to put it where I'm not going to like stab myself on it or whatever. That mostly works, except there was one point in time my ex wanted to try it, like eating it. And he had to go collect it, and he had gloves, and then he set them on the bench and on the front porch. And I did not realize that one day when I went to take my shoes off outside because they were muddy, and sat on the damn cactus gloves. It sucked. It was not the best thing that I've ever done in my life. Instant regret. Yeah. I was going to do the video over at my brother's house today. I talked the other day about how that's kind of an ideal space to do them. But then, you know, they also have talked about like weird things that happen in their house. And, you know, they were the first owners of it, so it's kind of, if anything went in there, it's because they took it in there, kind of a thing. But it was this, I was sitting in the room I normally do the videos in, and the dogs were in there, and I didn't have anything playing on my phone, so it was just quiet, and I could have sworn that I heard somebody whistle, and it was like in the house. It was like, that sounds creepy. And it got the dog's attention, and India was just like looking out the door. I think what I finally determined it probably was is there were little kids outside playing, and it probably just sounded like it was inside, because it's like one of those housing additions where the houses are literally right on top of each other. And, you know, if you want to have your curtains open, that's fine, but you can see right in, or your neighbors can see right into your house and all that crap. And, I don't like that. Not my favorite thing. Which is also partly why, you know, they have their blinds closed all the time. They're light colored, so the light does come through them, but it's still not. I like having the house opened up and being able to look outside and all that stuff. And if there's people out there, and especially with their little nosy kid neighbors, because the kids that were previously Gracie's friends, I think she realized they weren't as fabulous as she originally thought. I think they have no boundaries. And so apparently they have, you know, they would, if my brother's family left the garage door open while they went in the house or something, they could come out and find the kids going into their garage and looking through stuff, because they're that kind of, yeah. So no boundaries, and their parents didn't seem to think it was a problem, or not enough of a problem to do anything about it. So yeah, so they just stopped hanging out more than anything. So it'll probably be better for Gracie when she does get further away from them, and, you know, this Oklahoma move. Still kind of, I don't know. I was walking Buttercup in India earlier, and I don't remember what I was thinking about, but as I was thinking, I had the thought pop into my head of, well, this is going to be the last time you do this. It's like, oh, not that again. And yeah, that's, you know, it's like, it's not saying ever, but I talked the other day about how, like, it feels like we're kind of shifting to different timelines, because I'm ready to clear out like all the junk and get to the stuff that lights me up in this lifetime. And, you know, I've talked about how I have had that sense with my brother, and I don't know if it's something that I've always known or if it's something that really registered in the past couple years, but I just had the sense of what I think it is is I think there's been a lot of stuff that I have picked up early in my life, just at an energetic level, but I wasn't able to make sense of it until I started really doing like the setting the boundaries, purging the lower densities and all that stuff. And I think regardless of when it came to my awareness, I think it wasn't until I started clearing some of the density out of my system before I really started understanding what I was receiving from the world around me. So I feel like I had that information about him when we were younger, and that I've just always had that sense. But at the same time, I don't think it really registered until I started really focusing on my energy and doing my healing work. And then it was like one day it just hit me, and it was like, this isn't his lifetime to awaken. And 11/11 as I said that. So yeah, but I mean, I don't think obviously it's not a problem or anything. That's just his life path, and I don't know what that's going to look like at the end of whenever things get situated into the new beginning. I don't know what that looks like for either of us, what that entails or anything. But it's still just weird feeling that space of being at an ending. And this one especially feels much more intense maybe than other endings I've experienced in my lifetime. And I think a big part of that is, I spent a lot of time talking about my grandfather and his death, and I feel like his death finally, it was like the thing that was kind of the thorn in the side, or whatever that thing is, that whole, the thing that was keeping me from getting anywhere that I wanted to go and doing things I wanted to in my lifetime. Okay, so yesterday I had a chaotic processing of this idea of like the thread and the spool, right? And I've talked about how it's felt like when my brother and I came around, literally all we were here to do was to feed into his spool, to keep him having all the energy, all the capacity to do things and have whatever bullshit life he wanted to have, since all he did was freak out about everything and anything. But I was thinking about the disconnection, and the setting boundaries, and severing the cord there. And when I said it, the thought process that was, or the thought that I had that was in my mind when I said it was, just severing the connection with wherever it was. But I think what it actually entails more of is, so my grandfather's been collecting all the different threads on his own spool, right, and pulling it into his life so he can literally suck the life out of everybody else, applying more thread to him, yet not doing anything with it. And ultimately we're all part of this divine tapestry, and we're all supposed to make our mark however we are inspired and inclined to do based on who we are. So then when he comes in, all he does is suck it out of everybody else, it's well, that's kind of bullshit. So what I was thinking on the disconnection point, it's not severing it at the level that things were when I realized it needed to be severed, right? So what it was is going back to the original connection point and severing it there, which then loosens all the, the thread that's been collected in his spool that he's been so tightly bound to, right? So it kind of loosens that chunk of it, and then as I was doing my own healing work, it's like pulling my own thread back and taking my life back from him. So he was no longer sucking it out of me. I was pulling it back to myself where it rightfully belonged, because you're not supposed to just come here and let anybody be the energetic vampire that my grandfather was fine and dandy with being. You're not supposed to do that. That's like why there's so many toxic everything in the world today. And it really doesn't matter where you look at. Like, if you want to look at just this country, if you want to look at other countries in the world, it's basically this world is made up of a lot of the lower density energies, right? So, Dolores Cannon has a book where she talks about the 3 waves of volunteers in the New Earth. And the first wave, she's talking about the ones who are basically the beacons that serve as kind of light posts for helping the next round of us to stay hopeful of the idea that it is possible to do better things, if you will. And of course, I talked a lot about my kind of my go-tos for me, just because of the personalities, the energies they've had that have influenced me. The ones that I go to the most often are people like Keanu Reeves or Brendan Fraser, Metallica. People that haven't necessarily had an easy life by any means, but they do their thing, they know who they are, and because of that, their light shines brightly for the rest of us. So the next round of us needed the beacons, basically. So the next round of us was to really go into the density and like the darkest depths of existence, and I've talked about like the vultures, how that's one of those symbols that kind of shows up for me a lot, especially here lately. And I kind of realized back in the fall or the summer that that's basically like what... No, I was gonna roll the window up, but since the wind kicked up, but the car shut all the way off again. I'm not starting it again, so sorry. But okay, so like the vultures, it's like, I think anybody, okay, if you've written a song where you have a line about vultures, or the song's entitled Vultures in some way, is that one, because there was a 5 Iron Frenzy song that I used to love called Vultures, and I was really into that in undergrad, and it's one of those things, like, I hear lines talking about it in songs. I think I've written poetry with talking about it before, and I wrote a thing that I read on here a few times before that was the idea of the vulture. And my animal apothecary, or oracle deck, yeah. The vulture card, it's called Immense Growth, and it says something about vultures are the golden purifiers, because they take something that's died and, they consume it to get it out. They take it as their nutrition to get it out of the, the environmental space, clean up the area so it's not just sitting there rotting and collecting maggots and all that fun stuff. And it's like, I feel like that is a important symbol for those of us who are essentially here to do that same kind of thing, right? So, I talk a lot about my suicidal ideation years, and then I can think a lot about a lot of songs that, talk about similar topics, and it's like, that makes perfect sense, that those of us that are here to transmute the dense energies, of course, we probably, my life, I spent many years feeling like I didn't belong here, and like my existence was a problem, and focused on the suicidal ideation because I thought my existence was somehow in error. And what I'm realizing now, especially with the setting of boundaries and not being influenced by other people's energies like I always have been, is that's part of what I've been here to do, is just to transmute the dense energy and help turn it into something else, right? So whether that's art, whether that's music, whether that's movies, those kinds of things, it's like, that's why, we are here to be creative. We're here to be the fullest expression of all the things that make us us, right? So whatever music you listen to, and I feel like I cross into so many different genres and it's like, I like all of the things, right? I like the variety, right? And I like the stuff that comes from people stepping fully into who they are. It's like, even if somebody steps fully into who they are and I'm not immediately drawn to that kind of music or that kind of art or whatever, I still have a solid appreciation for the fact that they're doing something different that, most of the world doesn't get to, right? Yeah. Okay, so I talk about watching movies over at my brother's house while they're gone, so it just kind of gives me more time to make sure I'm there a decent amount of time with the dogs without, I've been here long enough, and if I'm just writing, then I don't have the awareness of how long I've been there necessarily. But if I start a movie, even if I don't watch it, if it's just playing it and I know it's a 2-hour movie, then I can have the whole movie play out and be like, okay, I've been here 2 hours, now I can go home or whatever. So usually it's been Sing 2. This time around it's been more Sing 2. The first time around was kind of just both. Yesterday I shook it up and I kept seeing Trolls, the World Tour. And it's one of those, Sing 2 and this Trolls movie, I think I watched them with Gracie when she was little, but she wasn't able to sit still very long for movies back then, so it's like I caught bits and pieces of them, but I really had no idea what was going on. So then when I go back and actually watch it all these years later, then it's like, I feel like I've seen this. Have I seen this? And I think that's what I've come to the conclusion of, is she was not able to sit still, and so I was, sidetracked with what she was doing, and I had no idea what was happening in the movie. But anyway, I finally watched the Trolls World Tour movie last night. And it's like, on the one hand, it's like, yes, everything this movie is about is like, this is the world right now, man. And essentially, there's the toxic patriarchy system that's trying to keep everybody bound into conformity and not being who they are, because if people fully embrace who they are and share that with the world, then the toxic stuff that has kept us all from being able to step into who we are can't continue. It's like, that's the biggest thing I've realized, like with my family. It's like, there's been so much, it's like my existence was a problem, but at the same time they were benefiting from sucking the life out of me, just that energy vampire thing, and then like with my grandfather, as soon as I started setting boundaries, it's like it was noticeable really quick when like all hell started breaking loose with the family, if you will. Like he went from he always had the death obsession, but it's like it hit a point where he was no longer able to just suck the life out of like me and my brother, because we started setting boundaries. I started first, and then I told my brother what I was noticing, and then he started doing it, and then it really just like picked up. We both talked about how it seemed like he went downhill pretty quick once we disconnected. And going back to that, cutting the cord at the original connection point, and then pulling my thread back to me, because I realize it's been wasted. Back in August last year, I got to that point where I realized I had literally wasted 33 years of my life mourning my grandfather's death, and he hadn't died yet. And it's like, that's some bullshit. And I woke up one day and I'm like crying, having this thought, and I was just like, I have wasted 33 years of my life mourning this man's death, and he hadn't died yet. So I decided then, it's like, I will not mourn any longer. And I stopped going around so much to visit him and all that stuff. And in the times that I was around, at one level it does kind of feel like he kind of picked up the poking at me and trying to get some sort of reaction, because I could sit there quietly in the room that he was sitting in, and I would be working on a puzzle, and he couldn't stand it because I wasn't giving him my attention or whatever, so he'd pick out the thing about me that was different or whatever, and honestly, the hair never seemed to be as much of a problem as like, you got a thing in your lip, that kind of stuff. But and it's like, my mom thought it was all cute and funny when the day that I went with her and my aunt to take him to one of his appointments, and he made that comment, and oh, he just didn't know you had it. It's like, I have had it for over a year, and it's funny because every time I have been alone in the room with that man and he's had nothing else to say, he will go to that, because it was the thing about me that was different, that he most obviously could see and have a problem with. Never said anything about the nose rings for some reason, so I don't know. But it was always the lip ring, and before then, back in, was it like 2010, I think. I was dating a guy that had a motorcycle, and because we would go out on his motorcycle periodically, it's like, well, if we're gonna do this, then maybe at some point I want my own. I had no idea about riding a motorcycle by myself, so I took the motorcycle safety class that Abate does, and it was kind of a cool experience, right? But when my mom decided to go out of her way to tell my grandfather that I was taking that motorcycle class, then he had like the real strong reaction of, why do you always got to do everything different? You got two of the ugliest cats in the world, you got damn geckos, you got tattoos, and now you're taking a motorcycle class. And it's like, I was very proud of myself when I just looked at him and said, my sole purpose in life is to piss you off. And it shut him up. You know, but like once I started like really disconnecting and taking my thread back, if you will, and I think that's the bit of the analogy that I kind of didn't have quite yesterday when I was talking about it. It was taking back what's mine, and you know, you have done nothing but make me feel like a horrible person simply for existing, and yet you're literally sucking the life out of me so you can last longer, far longer than he should have. So yeah, when I disconnected it, or when I severed that connection, it was like, now I can pull this back to me. So like every layer of every trip around the spool, let's go there. Every trip around the spool that I have spent focusing on my healing process has been taking more of what's mine back. And you know, that's kind of one of the big things that I've realized was so important on this whole life thing is so was it, I think 2023 I did this or I watched this mystical connections thing that Hay House put on, and they were or I think Radleigh Valentine was talking about something that we do is like we basically send out energy from our solar plexus chakra to see what is hurting in the world around us so we can heal it to make the world safer for us to exist in, right? But as we send out these little feelers, he called them, you know, you can't, it's very windy. He said you have to take time every now and then to call back what's yours. You can't just let your energy go to everybody and try to help help just anybody, because not everybody wants your help, really. That's something I've talked about several times on here as well. You know, like with my Uncle Dave, when he was in the hospital, you know, mind you, anytime I'd ever heard that man speak, if somebody asked him how he was doing, it was always, not a damn bit of good, you know, and he'd always go automatically to the worst case scenario and pulling people into that kind of drama. So then when he ended up in the hospital, he had some sort of, I wanted to say it was like a diabetic related event of some sort, and my aunt had to call 911 to have him taken to the hospital. And the hospital he ended up at, you know, like when he was there, he had like a tube down his throat or something. He wasn't able to talk, and my mom said at one point that, you know, she and my dad went in to check on him and see how he was doing, and he couldn't communicate, but all he could do was sit there and cry. And so she was talking about how sad that is. And mind you, my mom's also one of those that's really big on the come feel sorry for everybody in the world with me. Let's focus on how miserable and sad everything is and how bad the world is and blah, blah, blah. It's like, nah, no. So she wants to talk about the dense stuff, then I'm generally, nope, I'm done. And go in the other room. And it's not that I don't see it or that I think it belongs there, I guess. It's more going back to that point, the book before the book with Dave, I realized like I really wanted to do something to help, and what I realized was you don't know what somebody signed up for to learn in this lifetime. You don't know what another soul is here to learn. You cannot interfere with somebody else's life lessons, you know. So it's like, okay, received. You know. And Dave was like the first one. It's like, okay, like, because I've always had this sense that it's like I'm somehow supposed to be a healer, but I don't know what that means. I don't know what that looks like because I've been so disconnected from that part of my life. And I think a big part of that disconnection was this point of I've spent my life feeling like because I could feel the pain of others in the world around me, that meant I was somehow responsible for healing it. And that's not the case, because, you know, okay, like the book that I was reading the other day, it's José Luis Stevens, How to Pray the Shaman's Way, I think. Like he was talking about, you know, you don't know if, you know, there's an illness or something that Spirit knows is going to teach them a particular lesson, and only that illness is going to be able to teach the lesson that they're here to learn. Or you don't know if there's something that they're in some way benefiting from, you know, like the example that he used, I think, was if somebody gets some sort of benefit from having the people feel sorry for them or whatever, and kind of getting back at others, you know, so they have this health thing that ends up coming up as a sort of, haha, now, whatever. You know, one of those kind of things. It's like, if they're out to make somebody try to make somebody feel a certain way, get some kind of reaction about it, if they're being rewarded in that way, you know, like my family, like my grandfather being the energetic vampire that he was rewarded with everybody else's life going to feeling terribly sorry because he was dying for 33 years at least, you know. And yeah, that's the whole thing. Oh, messed myself up with skating on that end. That makes me think, okay, so when I was skating, I had this thought of I just came over here because it's a nice day and school is out. This is the last day of spring break for the community schools, so I wanted to enjoy skating earlier in the day, right? And not much earlier, it's like 2. Normally I just come over here after school lets out, which is 3:45 to 4. I will come over here because that's generally enough of the pickup traffic has left at that point in time. But, you know, the teachers and stuff are still here, but it's not too bad. But today it was like, there's nobody here, so I'm going to come over at like 2 o'clock. So I did. And while I was skating, I had this thought of, I didn't have to do it, but I thought about it, so I went ahead and did it. And what that was is 3:45 is normally about when the dogs eat around our house, right? For their afternoon dinner. And mine are kind of notorious for, they will wait on me, and like if my parents are there and I am not, they will not act up to my parents and let them know that they haven't eaten. So a lot of times if I'm gone and then come back at like 6, then they're pissed at me, noticeably pissed at me, because they're hungry and it's like that much after their dinner time. And like every time my mom and dad are like, well, they didn't tell us. It's like, probably because they know I'm more reliable about I'm going to do it, because, well, that's generally my thing. I mean, 3 of them are mine, so of course I'm going to make sure my dogs get to eat. Well, that's breakfast or dinner, and at ridiculous times sometimes, but whatever, it is what it is. But I thought about it, and I hadn't told my mom that I was over here. I mean, that part was irrelevant because I was just in the mood to skate, so I came to skate. But I sent her a text. I said, I'm skating, but I did not feed the dogs. Because yesterday I threw like a cup of food on the floor, kind of half fed them, and didn't say anything. And then she said she fed them later. It's like, oh yeah, so they got extra food. Because she always gives way more than should anyway. I mean, yeah. They're all on diets, and if she's going to throw food on the floor, it'll be like 4 cups, and it's like 2 of them don't get a full cup. You know, the bigger 2 get a full cup, but the others do not. So the other 2, so if we have 4 cups of food on the floor, somebody's getting way more than they're supposed to, which I think Peppy gets a lot more that way. But she's hella chunky. She's a little bitty thing that weighs about 10 pounds more than she should. So since that was the case yesterday, I went ahead and sent my mom a text and said, I'm over here skating. I did feed the dogs, or I did not feed the dogs. And she sent me a message saying, okay. And then, because I stupidly told her what was going on in my world, I got a message back saying, Grandma's gonna need you to clean her carpet again at some point. She got out of bed and fell in the middle of the night, and in the time it took her to get up off of the floor, she peed 4 or 5 times on the floor. It's like, I was just like, had to invite the bullshit in when you were skating, didn't you? Didn't you? Oops. So, yeah. On the one hand, it's an easy way to make $50. On the other hand, I'm sick of my family drama. This is family drama bullshit. It's like stupid shit all the time. And, you know, like I've talked about many times, like my grandma is one that's really bad about this because, you know, on that life lesson thing, because she entered into the agreement with my grandfather that she should not exist after he dies. So she's currently still alive and he's dead, so she's having to deal with the sort of dissonance that comes from the fact that she's not gone yet. You know, so there too, since, okay, so they had their agreement, right? And then they have these 3 kids, so there's their thread being added into his spool, right? So then they each have 2 kids. So, and my brother and I were the oldest of them, so, you know, he's kind of pulling on our threads much longer than the other kids. But it was still energetic vampire stuff. He still was sucking the thread, pulling it to his own spool, rather than sharing who he was with the world as he was meant to be here. I mean, for what it's worth, I feel like that too is how he was meant to be here, because it has taught me these lessons. And I think like that this is honestly the biggest thing in my life. Like, I was always terrified of doing the things to mess up and like embarrass the family, but it comes down to I was literally put here to pick up these lessons and to be able to share that as I'm learning the things that I am from it. Like, so, you know, so when I had the connection severed with my grandfather and started doing my healing work and pulling my thread back to my spool so I can have my own little life, right? And, you know, like a big part that's played out on is, I've talked about how, you know, I had this sense that, like, it was almost like I was receiving what my grandfather's demons and my mom's demons were communicating beneath the surface when I was younger. And what I've realized it kind of was a sort of fear of what I was here to do, ultimately, because it's like, it seemed like there was something with, she's going to ruin us and expose us to the light or whatever. I don't know, some kind of, it was just a weird thing. Like, I always felt there was something beneath the surface, and as I've cleared out some of the density, then it's like I'm able to see, like I was talking about with my brother, then I'm able to see what I was picking up on in a different way. So before, you know, little 8-year-old me that's receiving this information, and it was more just a feeling, like, I didn't know what to do with it. I just knew that I was somehow a problem for my family, right? But as I've been doing this healing work and releasing some of this density through sharing my story in this space and, you know, making different connections, because the biggest thing, one of the biggest things I think that has been so important for me doing this channel is, when I started out, it's pretty obvious that I was not in the same headspace that I am now. Like, I was afraid of my own ass and all that. So, you know, of course, some of the themes were the same. Like, I had the one video that I did where I basically said that I was sick of my life, and it was after the deal with my dad where he called me a dumb bitch. And, you know, before I really had time to process it, but in that time, you know, I was able to express that much on the video because, like, I was so pissed and upset at various levels. But I really had the sense, like, when my dad said that, it wasn't so much that he had said that, it was, I got this really strong sense that he'd killed me in other lifetimes. I was like, well, that's a whole thing, too. You know, and then I have some ideas of how I think that has happened. You know, and I feel like there is that level where where you're still connected to your little soul spark or whatever. It's like you're here to learn different lessons through each lifetime, but you still carry with you the lessons that you've learned in the other lifetimes. And I remember when I was 8, I had this, we went on a Florida vacation with some family friends and with my grandparents, and I almost drowned in the ocean, and my dad did too. But, like, the bigger thing was, you know, because I was with him and I got caught in the undertow, and then he also got caught in the undertow, and the family friend Mike, who ended up dying last year in the first set of 3 deaths for the year, Mike was the one that saved us both, right? And I remember feeling then like there was some kind of disconnect on, like, the relationship with my dad even. And it wasn't that I blamed him for not being able to save me, but maybe at one level it was feeling like I always felt like there was more to it. Like, yes, I almost drowned in the ocean when I was 8. But what if that was a way in which I was reminded of a past existence where I did drown, regardless of the way that happened. It just always seemed like there was more to it, and in another lifetime I had died that way. And I remember throughout my life there have been these big landmarks, I guess, to kind of remind me. I think, because I always had the sense that, okay, there was the deal when I was 8 and almost drowned. But then, okay, when I was 16, I had no interest in getting my license because when I was in driver's ed, one of my friends, who was actually into the whole driving thing, she was driving the car and her mom was teaching her. She had her permit and all that stuff, and they were at a stoplight. It was there was a crosser. It wasn't 4-way, it was a 3-way, and so there's the way that both, traffic was going both ways. That they had the green light, and so she was stopped at this light, and the car behind her wasn't paying attention, and she got rear-ended, and it shoved her car out into oncoming traffic, and her mom got killed. So obviously that has its own, there's a whole lot in that scenario, that has a lot of weight, and would suggest that that little traumatic element, you might have an aversion to wanting to do it. But at the same time, once I did start driving, it was kind of, when I was 17, my mom kind of was like, you got to do this. But then I was always terrified to drive with anybody in the car. And I always had this fear, for a long time, I didn't think I was going to live to 18. And kind of all the big landmarks, 18, 21, it's I think that's a fairly common thing from what I've heard people talk about, but it's I just always figured I would die before I got to this point. And of course, while I was struggling with the suicidal ideation, I was trying to make sure I had no reason to keep going, and I would actively do things to hate myself more so I could feel like I really didn't deserve to be here, and I don't know, the deal with driving my high school boyfriend around, because I was a little older, that made me nervous. And I remember having a dream back then that we got in a car accident and he died and I lived, and that survivor's guilt and just all that. But I always had that fear, and it's could there have been somewhere in a different lifetime with that even? Yeah, I don't know. Maybe. But then if you want to think broadly enough, if all things are part of the divine whole, then every incarnation, whether it be your soul spark having different existences or others having existences, it all feeds into the collective whole. And so for good or bad, it all affects all of us. kind of tired. 5 o'clock. 37%. We're still good. Like I said, I feel like... See, the big thing, like, with skating was, okay, painting my room. My now room. When I started, I was just going to do, like, a wall and a half, and it was to fix the messed up part, you know, where my dad put 16 holes in the wall because he couldn't find the stud to hang the thing. So then I had to fix that, right? So the first wall and a half, I think I had skated recently, and I was just like in the mood to go ahead and get this project going. But then I was like, I don't want to stop there. It's like I felt like I needed to keep going. And the next wall and a half that I did not skate first. And like you can tell with how I did the paint that I was feeling more chaotic when I did it. Because the paint looks more chaotic. And that was like one of the big things I realized back then was, like, if I go to paint on a canvas, I was like, there's so much chaos I have to get out of my system before anything starts to look like anything. And, you know, usually I don't set out with, I'm going to paint a beach scene. I never know what I'm going to do. It's like, I have some colors, and I'm going to roll with the colors, and then see what happens. And I have this one painting that, honestly, I didn't like it when I did it. But the biggest thing was, I had added orange in on something else I was doing, and it wasn't one of my go-to colors back then. But so if I'm painting something, when I get to the point when I'm ready to be done painting, I don't want to waste the paint. So I will get another canvas and just like throw it on the canvas, however it turns out, and just let it be whatever. And it was kind of weird because like some of the paints that I had were kind of getting gooey, and so like there every now and then there would be like a chunk where it was kind of weird, and it's like that's not cool. But I never had the intention of leaving this as a painting. It just was one of those things where, in using up the last of the paint that I had out, it ended up looking kind of beachy, and it was solely just because the colors that I had and the way that I, like, the areas I put them in, incidentally looked kind of like the beach at dusk kind of a thing. And so I was like, well, I don't hate that at all. It doesn't look immensely like it, but loosely, and it's like, okay, I kind of like that now. So this painting that I had no interest in actually keeping as it is now hanging on the wall because it accidentally turned out kind of looking loosely like something that I hadn't anticipated. You know, so but it's like every time I sit down with some paint, it's like I figure out what colors I'm going to use and then just kind of go from there. And yeah, when I'm done, I just throw it on another canvas and hope for the best kind of a thing. But it's like every time I have ever tried to paint, there's so much chaos I have to get out of my system before I feel like I'm doing anything useful or semi-artistic for that matter. Just like getting the chaos out of my system is the big end task or end goal. And like that was what really became clear to me when I was doing or painting my room. It was just like, this is just like all the chaos in my system finally out of my system, and finally I can see it out of my system. But then because we establish chords with people in our lives and the various contexts that we have, people try to pull us back into their icky stuff. So even though I have severed many connections with family members and keep myself at a distance from them, every now and then they try to find a way to pull me back in. Like, so my mom and trying to get me to feel some kind of sorry for my grandmother. But it's like, I will never feel sorry for my grandmother, because she entered into that energetic agreement when she went ahead and married my grandfather, even though he had made the comment of, what business does she have living if I'm not around? That he already had that statement. So that ends up being an energetic agreement, right? So now that he did his part, he finally died. Finally. Just took forever. Now she has to deal with the dissonance of still being here and knowing she's not supposed to be living because of this agreement that she had with her dead husband, and he died first. So then too, when my mom and her sisters come along and start feeding into the spool and the toxic enabling and all this bullshit, they've all entered into this agreement. So now my grandma's not doing her part, right? She's still alive. Why is she still alive? Because he's gone. That should have been the be-all, end-all of her life, too. Because, what business does she have in living if he's not around? And it's literally just that easy. You don't say, that's a dick move or a dick comment, and I don't agree with that. So if you don't agree with it, yet you enter into it, then you might as well have agreed with it, because you're in some kind of agreement with it if you're going along with it in any capacity. And that's what she did, whether she agreed with it or not. And I've talked about that came out to me when my grandfather was in the hospital with COVID, and I was basically babysitting my grandmother, and he was in the hospital, I think, for 14 days. And so she had this John Wayne puzzle that my mom had gotten her because they just loved John Wayne movies, or at least my grandfather did. And yeah, so it's like her puzzle table wouldn't fit the 1,000-piece puzzles because it's a little one. So since he was gone and wasn't going to be a problem, I said, why don't we clear the table off and we can do this on the dining room table, and then you will have done it. And she hated every minute of it because it's all brown and white. It's like just various shades of brown and white. It's like, for these old-timey pictures and whatnot. And there were like little scenes in this big thing. And it's like, but we did it. And I don't like Westerns at all, but we got it done, and then we got rid of the puzzle because she didn't like it. And forever, not really forever, but she's always dumbed herself down, and I remember when I moved back as I was getting my divorce, I remember sitting in the kitchen at her house, or in the dining room, and listening to her in the kitchen. She's just going, what'd you do that for, dummy? That was stupid. And just literally nonstop tearing herself down that entire time. It's like, it is no wonder that my inner voice was so negative when that's literally what I grew up around, and she's not the only one that did it by any means, because of course she does that around her kids, then that becomes their inner voice. And then, if they do that around their kids, then it's just continuing to perpetuate the toxic, icky habits, right? So, yeah. So I think that's the biggest thing with the world as it is now, is we're seeing large scale what happens when people have entered into all these toxic agreements, and it doesn't look good. Like the country, the world, like it's so negative and so dense, and nobody gives a shit about anybody else. It's like that is literally not good. But you have to heal what you can. You have to heal it in yourself. You can't heal anything for anybody else. You have to heal the stuff for yourself. So like a big part of, for my journey on this YouTube thing, I talked about how terrified of doing this thing I was when I started it. And I used to sit with my phone for like a good half hour to 45 minutes before I could even start doing a video, because I was stressing out over it so much. It's like I don't know what to talk about. And then what I realize now is a big part of it is just talking and getting through the stuff where you're maybe not sure of what you're saying, and yet you're supposed to do the thing, so you're going to keep going anyway. And it's like I know there have been several of my videos where I end up talking and it's like, well, that's clear as mud. So I think that's part of it too, is whenever I get to where I'm meant to be and people eventually want to assume that it wasn't hard work for me to get there, then there's this whole YouTube thing that already exists that says, yeah, right, want to bet? And you can actively go through and see, how long it took me to get through to talking about some of this stuff. I think that's a seed or something off a tree. Or I'm pretty sure it's not a bug. But yeah. And I was thinking about that too, like I remember, the guy that I dated for 4 years that I thought I was going to marry, I remember this one conversation in particular. Like, I opened up about the suicidal ideation aspect, but there were other things that I wouldn't open up to him about, and I can look at it and see how it was automatically like dialing back on who I was, right? And it's like, then because I wasn't willing to take the chance and be vulnerable to share, some of the heavier stuff that I carried around, I didn't give him the opportunity to be there for me in that way. And since I didn't give him that opportunity, it's like I started just diminishing my light, basically. And so, like, when it finally came around and we were breaking up, it was like, how can you even feel bad that it's over when you weren't fully yourself in that situation anyway? It's like I actively said and did things that became a flawed version of me just trying to be who I thought he wanted me to be. And it's like, what kind of existence is that? And yet that's like most of the relationships that I've ever seen in my life, is people not being willing to step into the fullness of who they are. And at the end of the day, I think that's really what people, if we're going to be in relationships, why wouldn't we want to be with somebody we could fully be who we are with, right? And, you know, because anywhere that you aren't willing to step into who you are, flaws and all, you know, it's basically telling them that you don't deem yourself worthy. And if you don't deem yourself worthy, then why should anybody else deem you worthy? You know, so, yeah. I don't even know how I ended up on that tangent now. But yeah, I was thinking about that this morning. Like, I was thinking the whole twin flame stuff and all that. It's like, I feel like the perfect person for me. See, that's the thing. Okay, previously, perfect. You know, I could accept anybody's flaws is the big thing. And yet I could never accept my own. But really, it's like the point of our imperfections is to allow others to step up into, okay, like, I can't do this, but somebody else can. So why should I try to do this if I can, you know, bring somebody else in to help me with it? You know, if I'm just going to mess it up on my own, right? Like, I think to those god-awful cabinets that I tried to freaking stain when I had no idea what I was doing on, you know, staining. It does not work the same as paint. There are stains that are like paint. That was not the kind that I had. And it was not good. And they're very ugly and waiting to be painted still. But through that learning experience, you know, what I learned was the amount of work that it would take to stain those cabinets that color and do it well is way more energy than I care to exert on that project at all. Now, painting them, I was going to paint them, but I kind of just don't even care, to be honest. I kind of just like to get to the point where I have disposable funds and then just pay somebody else to fix it, because oops. But yeah, but at least I can laugh at myself about it. That's kind of a big deal. Kind of don't want anybody to be in the house and see them, but yeah. Especially anybody that does know what they're doing on that end. You know, but knowing that that is a different kind of effort that I'm willing to put forth on something, like, I really just am not interested in that kind of project. But it's only through doing it badly that I really came to terms with the fact that that's not something I want to do. You know, and I appreciate the fact that there are people out there that are capable and knowledgeable of doing the things and can do it well. You know, I think about, like, you know, I've talked about how my dad didn't really teach me and my brother to do a lot of things other than half-assing the things. It's like, yeah, he's capable of doing stuff, but at the same time, when he's been at home, he hasn't wanted to do it. It's like, okay, so he'll half-ass it. So he'll just, you know, go all the way down the line and shoot 16 holes in the wall with the freaking drill to find the stud, because he didn't give a shit, you know, and, well, it's going to cover, yeah, it's going to be covered up until the next time. But yeah, so going forward, it's like I can find, okay, so when I get to my little cottage house far away from here, and I go to have stuff hung up, I'll find somebody that knows what they're doing and cares about the project, and I can pay them to do the thing well, and then I don't have to worry about it on my own. See, I like that. Like, I don't care that I can't do it. I just like that there are other people that can make up for my shortcomings. And I feel like that's a big thing with my family, is like I can see the perfectionism, and even how that plays out, like in just different ways, anxiety and OCD type things. But it's like, because we are all a part of the divine. We are all a piece of the whole. None of us is the whole in and of ourselves. We have these shortcomings, so we can kind of, find how others can fit into the places where we are short, so it's like the puzzle pieces, right? So I don't have this piece, but you do. So, figuring out how to bring them together that way, right? Yeah, but it's like, we all have our shortcomings, we all have our flaws, because none of us was meant to be the entire thing by itself. So like the divine collective, we have to figure out how we can best work together with others to bring about the changes. So like, like the toxic patriarchal systems that are currently in place and having a really hard time dying, kind of like my grandfather did. There are those that just want to swing back and forth and act like, okay, well, this side won this time, and spends their whole time pointing at their fingers at that guy and all the ways he messed everything up, but then at the same time, when the other side gets in, then they're doing the same exact thing to the other side. So it's like, that's not a system that's ever going to change anything, and like I was getting those messages for a while about, you can't fix a problem at the level it was created. So this 3D existence that gave us toxic patriarchy and like bullying everybody else, thinking that anything can make one above the other. It's like, that's all bullshit. It's like, we all are here a unique piece to the divine whole, and we each have to figure out, we have to heal our stuff and figure out how to step into the fullness of who we are here to be before we will be able to see anything change. And, it starts at the individual level, because that's literally all we can do. And pointing fingers at everybody else is not going to establish anything. It's not going to solve anything. It's not going to do anything useful. All it is, continuing the bullying that the toxic patriarchal system allows to exist. But then too, because this system has existed for so long, obviously it's not going to just go away overnight. It's we got our work cut out for us, right? So we have to do what we can. Okay, so I'm immediately thinking, to the point that I've said on here several times, for the people that want to say they don't believe in God because there are all these problems in the world, and what's God doing to fix them? It's like, okay, so what are you doing to fix it, right? You are there, and everything you are, everything you have experienced in your lifetime has shown you different things about what does or doesn't work for you. So if you can see a problem, what are you doing to try to fix it too? Because if you're just pointing fingers to the divine and, well, I can't believe in God because God's not doing this, and yet you're actively not doing your part, well, I guess we see the problem, right? Or hopefully we see how that's a problem, but it's literally like we can't do anything before we fix our own stuff, before we heal our own stuff, so I've been thinking a lot about how I've spent a lot of time on my videos talking about issues that I'm having with my parents, my family, and just little things that come up along the way. It's like, on the one hand, it's like, man, it kind of seems shitty to have to be talking about all this all the time. On the other hand, energetically speaking, I've always known this is what I'm here to do, because I remember feeling like my grandfather's and my mom's demons were talking about me as a problem, because I was going to be the one to bring them into the light and to expose them to the light. And this is basically that. It's figuring out why these little things have been a problem. And like the stuff with my dad especially, like we have had a strained connection for a long time, but it's only been through this space where I'm talking through it, and this is my healing work, that I've been able to really realize how the things he's said or done have influenced me in a way that's made it so I accept shitty behavior from people outside of the family, because this is how I'm treated within the family, so why should I ever expect to be treated any differently? But the only way it works, if the behavior does not work, you have to figure out why I'm immediately thinking of, there's this girl I follow on Instagram that at first I wouldn't, because she made me uncomfortable. And the thing that made me uncomfortable, and this is really silly, like her profile picture is like a close-up of her cleavage. And it she really bothered me initially. And it's like, no, it's like, that's not a her problem. This is a me problem. What is it about that is the problem? And it goes back to that conditioning where, the world I have existed in has very much been in that sort of mindset of, like victim blaming. Like, okay, if somebody gets assaulted, well, how was she dressed? She probably asked for it, that kind of shit. It's like, that is something that I was conditioned by in my upbringing to have this sort of viewpoint. So then facing somebody that, like, she can do whatever the fuck she wants. It's her body, right? And at the end of the day, it is not her responsibility to fix everybody else's judgment, or to make herself be anything for anybody else because of how they've been conditioned by the world around them, right? So it's like, after I kind of realized that it was the conditioning talking, and it's like, I started seeing like the other stuff she was doing, and I kind of like her. It's like, okay, sure, the boob picture, the cleavage profile pictures kind of made me initially uncomfortable, but it's like, there's so much conditioning that goes into all of that. And I remember I think talking about like issues, racial issues with like slavery topics, okay? Right. So what I'm thinking, and probably going to botch my explanation for, just because I am not the clearest on this. It's talking through things is how I make the connections for myself. And no, it's not a pretty process, but that's a big part of my channel too. So if this hot mess can figure it out, you can too. But anyway, I remember, and I don't remember what class or what years it was from, but I remember hearing stories about the wealthy plantation owners or whatever that had slaves and would rape the slaves. And I'm thinking from because obviously that is never okay, right? And I don't care what the history is on it. None of that scenario is okay. But I remember feeling sorry for those people that were in that experience, but then also thinking about the hatred that existed between the women of color and the white women, right, whose father or whatever was the one raping the slaves. And obviously there's going to be a lot of hard feelings on both sides of that situation. But I think to the the issues that brings between women on both sides of it, right? And this is another thing where that whole toxic patriarchy is the problem, because the men felt they had the right? The men felt they had that they're the women that were acceptable to be with. They had the right to do what they wanted to them, but then also the ones that they deemed completely out of power to them, that they somehow had the right to do that as well. But then, I remember thinking about this scenario for the white women, because I know there's a whole lot of dissonance in the world that I grew up in, just on this end of things. It's so they saw the women of color as their property, but they also saw the others as their property. But then the white women, going back to that the cultural narcissism thing that I talked about yesterday, with sometimes the system makes it where those things come out more. So Dr. Ramani talked about how, in the cultural systems, in the lower levels where the family doesn't have power, somehow the male still has more power than the female, right? And then, and on the issues of race, there's still that dynamic, and whether, So, got a bug in my ear. Probably because I'm stuck on this one. It's like I'm trying to talk through it and make it make sense, and like I can understand different levels of how it's a problem and how it's feeding into the bigger problem, but it's still a pain in the ass to try to make sense of and work through because there's so many layers to it. So in that scenario, I just think too, I think it's, I don't even know. Maybe I should just abandon ship and come back to it another day. I've spent a lot of time thinking about these kind of things too. And of course, the town I'm from, I don't think there were any, it's lacking diversity. It has always been lacking diversity. It's finally catching up with the times, and it is about time, but it took a long time to get there, and still, oh my God. Okay, the thing that came to mind, this made it to national news at one point in time, and it's funny because it was in the neighborhood across from my brother's neighborhood. Somebody decided to poop on a house. How much difficulty goes into that itself, right? And it's clearly one of those cases where it's like the person that did it was probably hoping to be able to blame it on somebody else. But those cameras these days, y'all, so many people have them, and it ended up being this thing where some 74-year-old white woman shat on the neighbor's house, and it made the national news. And it's just like, I mean, without that evidence, who would they have blamed that on, really? I mean, probably anybody. But, they want to point out it's probably this little kid or whatever. And it's like, nope, that was a 74-year-old woman, and we have the evidence on the camera. So I feel like we exist now in a world that people end up ratting themselves out because they're just too silly to think that cameras. Oh man, I don't know. Anyway, the last bunch of this was a hot mess, and I probably should have ended it a long time ago. But I think the biggest thing I wonder is the patriarchal systems exist to tear us as completely apart, keep us as divided within ourselves and between the different ways that we're different and all this stuff, right? And tries to make anybody think that they're better than the others, or that, and a lot of times that does come through as even who's the bigger victim, who's more being harmed by this situation, kind of a thing. There's a hawk up there. And at the end of the day, it's like they're trying to demonize empathy, right? And if they are able to, and where I think immediately of the demonizing the empathy is that part on where the system has tried to bully boys out of being able to connect with their emotions, you know, by somehow saying they're not man enough if they, you know, if they cry or whatever, you know. It's just finding different ways to bully everybody else. And yet, it's through the unity that, you know, we're going to be able to heal the bigger issues. And these are like collective things, but all we can do is our own individual part. And, you know, sharing what we've learned with others, and then having conversations where we can share our different viewpoints on these things. You know, I think on the issue that or the scenario that I completely botched, you know, on like the racial end and the women that were being raped and assaulted by the men who thought they had some kind of right to it, but because they were property, but then the others were property too. But then they also had that element of, you're seeing this person that, okay, your father or grandfather or whatever, this figure in your life that also deems you not worthy enough, and then is assaulting the people that you've been raised to think are beneath you too. So how does that just different layers. It's like there's so much complexity to it. And I think that doesn't mean we should never have the conversations or try to talk about the different viewpoints. I think it just means we need actual conversations and actually listening to others, right? So I can't tell you what it's like to be in the situation of having been actually raped, but at the same time, I can speak to all these various times where I thought that I was somehow, like the one I keep going back to the most here lately, the guy in basic training that because the drill sergeant said, make your battle buddy happy to, so we could get closer together to use body heat to stay warm because it was freaking cold outside, and he felt he had some kind of right to just lean his dick up against me because, well, they said make your battle buddy happy, right? And it's like, I remember thinking specifically, who the fuck even cares, right? Because that was my conditioning speaking, because all these other ways that my life showed me that it didn't matter one way or another what happened, because going back to that deal with my cousin when I was 8, and he told everybody we had sex. That's not what happened, but my family bought into it and just made me feel bad about myself. They just used guilt and shame to fix the problem, and yet all it did was create a bigger problem, because then I grew up thinking that I was somehow a whore, and yet I was 35 before I figured out that I hadn't done anything, because I was so afraid to sit down and work through it. And it literally took, somebody that I had on a pedestal, it was just important to me, and I was afraid that if I connected with him, that I would my sadness would pull him down and make his life worse, right? So it's like, I felt isolated, and yet that one connection, it was only after he died, once he died, then I figured whatever's on the other side of death, he probably knows anything that there is to know about this situation, so why would I lie about it now? And so it gave me space to be more honest with myself than I'd ever been, because I started just writing letters and talking about, all the shit that I'd carried around from when I was 8, and it's just like starting to unpack that. But it took my friend's death to be able to do it, because before that, if I would have had the conversation with him in person, at some point I probably would have left out important details because I had been so traumatized by them and I was afraid of what it meant for me. But then all it ended up being was I was 35 before I realized that I had this view of myself that was absolute bullshit, because that was the world I was conditioned by. This is a lot longer than I was anticipating, and I don't think it was near as clear as I was going. I had I'm pretty sure, I did not spend much time on that trolls thing that I was going to talk about earlier. I think I wandered off from that again, and a whole bunch of other stuff. But yeah, I figure whatever happens is somehow meant to happen, and we're working on it. Like I said, this is my whole channel is specifically my process, and it's not pretty. It's been very ugly at times, and it's a hot mess, but it's fucking what I got, and now I'm just sharing it with people outside of myself. Before it was just me by myself, and that's why there's so many layers to this too. It's I'm doing the YouTube thing, I'm doing the journaling, I'm doing the clutter clearing of my space, and they all are an extremely necessary part of this, because they all go, they're so bound together that you can't really separate them. It's there's this energetic component that has to be worked through, then there's the more mental aspects of it, I guess, that has to be looked at, and then some physical clearing to make the space to do the stuff as well, and then to sit back and have some time to really process it, and then take on the next layer. So anyway, I know this one probably wasn't very good, but whatever, is what it is. Good anyway. I think that's the biggest thing, is even that little bit, if I just say, well, this is really bad and I shouldn't post it, it's well, that too is a judgment, and that too just prevents me from continuing to work through different aspects of it. So yeah, anyway, I will say I did the math yesterday, I think, because that's not really hard math, but I was thinking the first year that I did this, from November 11th, 2023 to November 11th, 2024, I had 12 subscribers. Yesterday, I think I saw I had 76. So it's what, I've gone up 64 in that, in the past, well, November, December, January, February, March, 4.5 months. It's that's a substantial jump for only having 12 the first whole year. And slow moving still. Like I said, I'm not actively going out of my way, hey, look at my channel, because it's a hot mess. I know that. But it's still the thing I know I'm supposed to be doing. So this is to help me make the thoughts make sense with the feelings and the emotions and the braining of things. But anyway, this is long enough, so I'm going to wrap it up and figure out if anything was clear today. And post it regardless. So, yeah, that's what it is. As always, I appreciate you. Until the next time. See ya.